not only hear from the political candidates, but also allow them to hear from us. As someone who owns and operates a business in the 4th Congressional District, it's important to me that whomever wins the election is a champion for the cause that will help me grow my business and my community. Thank you to BECMA and its partners for hosting this forum tonight. I look forward to hearing what each candidate has to say. Here now is our Executive Director, Siegel.
Thank you very much, Patricia. My name is Shagun Idawu, and I have the privilege of serving as Executive Director of BECMA. This August is Black Business Month, and with Primary Day a week from tomorrow, we have taken it upon ourselves to label these next few days as Civic Engagement Week. Beginning tonight, we are hosting 4 candidate forums for those running for Congress in the 4th Congressional District, the U.S. Senate, the 8th Congressional District, and the 7th Congressional District. Members like Patricia, who you heard earlier, are doing everything they can to keep their businesses open despite the daily pressures applied by COVID-19 and systemic racism. We know that beyond the services we provide to our over 300 members, making sure their voices are heard in city or town halls, Beacon Hill, and Congress are crucial to ensuring our issues are addressed. I'd like to thank our team, Jessica Pierre, Tiffany Caldas, and Nicole Obi, our board of directors, and our partners, Amplify Latinx, the Black Economic Council of the Berkshires, Commonwealth Kitchen, E4All Roxbury, Massachusetts EON, the Initiative for Competitive Inner City, or ICIC, the NAACP Berkshires, and the North American Indian Center of Boston for helping to make this series of events possible. I'd also like to thank the candidates for agreeing to participate and for their courage to run. Lastly, these discussions would not be possible without capable and professional journalists who will take the reins from here and engage the candidates in questions from the audience and our partners. I'm excited to introduce 2 local legends leading tonight's discussion, Joyce Ferriabough Bolling of the Boston Herald and Byron Barnett of WHDH-TV Channel 7. Joyce and Byron, thank you for being here tonight. I yield the floor to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Shagun. It's great to be here. I'm Byron Barnett, reporter and host of Urban Update on WHDH-TV Channel 7. I'll be serving as a co-moderator along with my partner, Joyce Ferriabough. You see her sitting right there next to me on the screen. You know, it's not often that Massachusetts voters have the chance to vote in an open election or in one where a seat is vacant. The 4th Congressional District has been represented by Joe Kennedy since 2013. Now, because he is running for a different position this year, it has set off a rush to fill that position by residents of the district who want to represent their communities. Well, tonight, we have all 8 candidates vying for that seat with us right here. Jake Auchincloss, Becky Grossman, Alan Casey, Isan Leckie, Natalia Linas, Jessie Mermell, Ben Siegel, and Chris Zanetos. Those are the candidates we're going to be hearing from. And now I'm going to toss it over to Joyce to finish up our little introduction here.
Good evening. And welcome to Black Business Month. The Black Business Month's Candidates Forum for the 4th Congressional District. I'm particularly happy that we are speaking to suburban candidates. I understand that Joe Kennedy served the district, but these are individuals who are from suburbia, and there's some specific questions related to Black capital and growth that I personally would like to see, and I think people who are tuning in would like to see, because we need more connection to suburbia than we currently have. Let's talk about how the layout of this forum. Candidates have been divided into 2 sets of 4. Set 1 is Isan Leckie, Natalia Lenas, excuse me if I butcher your name, my buddy, Jessie Mermell, and Ben Siegel. We'll ask each of you to introduce yourself and why you are running. And we're going to be tight on this. It'll be a minute. So think of it as your elevator speech. Starting with Asan.
Thank you so much, Joyce and Byron, for hosting us. There's a little bit of a feedback in the sound. Does that sound like that on your end?
Don't worry about it. We'll make it.
Okay, just making sure our viewers can have the best of sound. Well, thank you so much for organizing and for having us representing the 4th District of Massachusetts from Fall River to Brookline. My name is Ehsan Lucky. I am so proud to be running this multiracial, multi-generational movement that is here to serve the most vulnerable in our communities. When I launched my campaign in May of 2019, it was a campaign rooted in racial justice, and our platform reflects just that, serving the Black community, especially Black transgender single moms, is where we start from. And we know that this is rooted in housing, in healthcare, in environmental justice, in reproductive justice, in education justice. Everywhere, when we think of the whole child and the whole human, we think of our Black community and where we have left them behind for so long. So that's where I'm here to represent. I grew up in Morocco, North Africa, to a public school teacher and a farmer mother. I came here with nothing. I mopped the floors in restaurants, earning poverty wages, and I worked my way to taking down the biggest banks on Wall Street as a regulator, fighting for our small businesses, fighting for our communities to stop the biggest greed in our country from destroying them. And so today, I'm happy to be here to talk to you more about our plans of how we're going to uplift not only the voices of the Black community, but to actually uplift their lives, and not only in 1 month out of the year, but throughout every hour and every day of the whole year.
Natalia, you can do your opening statement.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Dr. Natalia Linas, and I'm an epidemiologist. I'm a mom of 3 little kids, and I entered this race because of the COVID tragedy. As someone who has dedicated my life to health equity, working to reduce health inequities, both in the US, which are so stark, especially between Black and white Americans, as well as internationally while working at the United Nations, it felt urgent to step into this race when COVID hit. COVID has been a disaster, and the federal government has simply failed all of us, but it has failed communities of color at disproportional rates. It has failed small businesses. It has failed parents like myself who are so worried about whether we get to go back to school. And we need expertise on this issue. Right now, Congress has 14 scientists and no one really that can lead us forward and lead us through this crisis. So I stepped into this race to serve. I've been working with the Poor People's Campaign as part of their Health Justice Advisory County, and I have heard from working families about how difficult the last few months have been. I look forward to today's forum to talk about what the future holds, what plans I have in order to ensure that we actually build a better future. If this tragedy has taught us anything, it's that we need Medicare for all, it's that we need racial justice, and that we need to ensure that our aligned progress is aligned with the Green New Deal and a future that actually works for everyone. Thank you.
Okay, all right. And we have Jessie and then Ben. Jessie next.
Well, Byron, Joyce, and everyone at BECMA, thank you so much for having me. My name's Jessie Mermell, and I'm running for Congress to take on Donald Trump and his minions, fight for Medicare for all and reproductive health care, and to lead an equitable recovery to COVID-19. And none of that will be possible if we don't tackle the economic inequity, the racial inequity that has plagued our country for over 400 years. The people of the 4th Congressional District need a congresswoman who has the background and the skills to make sure that we're finally charting a fair, just, and equitable path forward. And I've built a 20-year career here in Massachusetts doing just that. From my time at Planned Parenthood, working to make sure that all of our patients had access to quality, affordable care, particularly our BIPOC patients, to on the economic side of things, running the state's progressive business organization, where we worked to focus on policies that we know particularly lift up Black and Brown families, raising the minimum wage, earned sick time, paid family and medical leave, making the zoning changes that are necessary to increase affordable housing. And around transportation, I was so proud to partner with BECMA to make sure that business organizations run by women, run by BIPOC leaders were centered in the debate around transportation. And just 1 year ago, or right now, was sitting in conference rooms across Boston with leaders like Shagun and so many others to fight for just and equitable investments in transportation. I'm proud to be in this race. I'm excited to be with you this evening, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss these important issues with you.
Okay, all right, and Ben.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ben Siegel, and I want to thank Shagun and the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts for putting together tonight's forum. Look, I jumped into this race because no other candidates were talking about combating hatred, bigotry, racism, and anti-Semitism. None of the other candidates were talking about how do we advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. And none of the other candidates were talking about how do we actually all come together in order to solve the big issues of the day. Because we are so much stronger when we are united than when we are divided. It's been the entire theme of our campaign since day one, we the fourth, that we are all in this together, and that the voices of all the residents of the 34 cities and towns in the 4th District need to be amplified. That's why it's more important than ever that we elect a diverse leader who truly understands the diverse perspectives of our community. And I will be extremely proud when elected to be the first Latino ever elected to Congress for Massachusetts. So I look forward to our conversation tonight.
Okay, well, thank you, candidates, for those wonderful introductions there. We're going to jump right into the questions. And again, we're going to try to keep our answers to a minute so we can move it along and get more questions in there. We're going to start right with you, Natalia. This question will be for you. You'll be starting things off here. COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on Black and other minority businesses. A July National Bureau of Economic Research report found that more than 41% of Black businesses have shut down since February as a result of the pandemic. Federal programs like the Paycheck Protection Program did little to support these businesses, as the Center for Responsible Lending report found that 95% of Black businesses and 90% of minority businesses did not have access to PPP in the first round. If elected, what will you do to get needed financial relief to these businesses? And is there current legislation that you would co-sponsor if reintroduced in the next session of Congress? Natalia, you have the first shot at this.
Thanks so much. I'm running on a platform to bring data, science, and equity to the conversation. So it's wonderful to see these numbers. It's also devastating to see the impact has been so unequal. So we need to make sure, number one, that we're collecting the data, that we're ensuring that we are following and making PPE eligibility criteria ones that make it easier. There have been too many barriers for small businesses to access the PPP, so we need to make sure that those barriers are removed. Eligibility criteria, such as having a criminal justice sort of background, need to be removed. I believe that Senator Warren's plan to bring $7 billion specifically, her small business equity fund, is something that we need to support. And I believe that we need to ensure that families and small businesses have the money that they need, but also ensure that they can protect their workers with access to, PPE, hand sanitizer. So it's both financial support, technical support to keep their workers safe. Because, one fact is that Black Americans, 1 in 3 know someone who has died of COVID. The rate for white Americans is 1 in 10. We need to change that.
Okay, all right. Natalia, thank you. Jessie, you are next. If you want me to repeat the question, I can. It's kind of long, but if not, we'd prefer just to move right along. Jessie?
Great. No, I'm all set. Thank you. There are a few important pieces of legislation that already exist in Congress that I would enthusiastically back. Senator Kamala Harris and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, who has endorsed me in this race, have filed something called the Save Our Streets Act, which would put just shy of $125 billion into small businesses, 75% of that money would go to typically disenfranchised businesses. So Black and brown owned businesses, women owned businesses. This is incredibly important when we look at, Byron's, to your point, the ways in which those businesses have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. Maxine Waters has also filed legislation that would make it easier for those businesses to secure lending from financial institutions. That's something else we need to lift up. Earlier today, I was talking to a Black woman business owner from the 4th Congressional District. She's owned her business for 20 years. And the thing she highlighted for me was the need to have more opportunities to bid on business. Now, this is something BECMA knows a lot about. It's been working with the city of Boston on procurement issues for a long, long time. So I'd also want to explore ways in which that Congress can file legislation to make those bidding processes more transparent, easier to navigate, and create new opportunities for Black-owned businesses to secure contracts for new business.
Okay, Ben, you're up next.
Yes. Thank you very, very much. Look, we know that there were two major reasons that the PPP funds fell through the cracks for our Black and brown businesses. Number one, many were ineligible because they were 1- and 2-person businesses. And number two, there was a lack of relationships with lenders and banks and credit unions. So there are 8 things I think we really need to do. Number one, we need to have the PPP go directly to the businesses, because Black and Latinos have historically been shut out from our lenders and our banks. Number two, we need to focus, and if we can't go directly to businesses and individuals, then let's go to the community development financial institutions, CDFIs, that focus a lot on the financially distressed. Number three, we can't require that 60% of these PPP funds goes to payroll. When you have 1- and 2-person companies, you need it to go to utilities and to rent and to operating costs. We need to, number 4, make sure we're providing resources for PPE so that these companies and their customers are safe. Number 5, let's focus the PPP funds on companies that are 50 or less. Number 6, let's simplify the process. It's way too complicated, and most 1- and 2-person companies that are mostly Black and Latina owned do not have the accounting or the HR resources. Finally, the last 2 things, we need to provide and collect and provide data so we can understand the true differences and the racial disparities with the PPP funds. And finally, let's turn a lot of these loans into grants for the small businesses.
Okay, Ben, thank you very much. And finally, on this question, we will go to Ihsan.
Thank you very much. Look, the structural flaw in the Paycheck Protection Program is that it uses banks as the middleman. And as a Federal Reserve regulator, I saw that when we give the banks that leeway to be in charge of choosing which customers to lend to, we fall again in the same racial injustice that we see in everyday life. And so we're gonna end up with deep disparities and inequities. In future financial relief packages, I will advocate to make sure that we eliminate the bank as the middleman and instead making grants instead of these loans available directly to small businesses and sole proprietors through the federal government, and enforce fair lending practices to remove discrimination from the lending processes. I also support Representative Ayanna Pressley and George Meeks and Senator Kamala Harris's demand that the Treasury Department and Small Business Administration act to ensure that minority-owned businesses are not shut out of the Paycheck Protection Program. The administration must demand guidance on the Paycheck Protection Program to reaffirm lending institutions' obligation to comply with fair lending laws and to require lenders to report on the demographics of any PPP lending.
Okay, Ihsan, thank you very much. And I'll toss it over to Joyce for the next round of questions.
Sagan can tell you I'm a little bit of a renegade here. And so I'm going to switch up a little question, because in the last few days, the Globe, New York Times, they've been full of stories on housing and affordable housing, particularly in the suburbs, which many of you represent. Can you tell me what you would do to change conditions in your area to attract and welcome more minority individuals, homeowners, businesses to District 4? The answer starts
Thanks,
with
Joyce.
Jessie
There's
Mermell.
so much that we need to do around affordable housing in all of Greater Boston, but particularly in the suburbs. And we are not incentivized in Massachusetts, because we don't have regional government, to approach this issue from a regional standpoint. So first, I have to say that I think the federal government needs to offer carrots and sticks for zoning changes that are necessary to allow for more affordable housing development, more workforce housing development, and allow for greater density, particularly around transit, but not exclusively. We also need to increase the low-income housing tax credit. We need to increase Section 202 and Section 8 funding. We need more money for existing affordable housing developments to make sure that that stock is safe and healthy and as modern as possible. And we need to make sure that we are holding HUD accountable. We know that Donald Trump and Ben Carson has made it easier for BIPOC residents, for LGBTQ+ residents to be discriminated against when it comes to seeking housing, a basic human right. And we cannot allow that to happen. I'm really proud to have been honored by CHAPA, a major affordable housing organization here in Massachusetts, for my advocacy work around this, running the Alliance for Business Leadership and supporting the Housing Choice Bill in the legislature, which would make sure that it's easier for communities to change their zoning and allow for increased density and more affordable housing. This is a racial justice issue. It is an economic justice issue, and it's something that I've been working on for a long time and look forward to leading on when I'm in Congress.
So the next person to answer that is Ben, and I want specifically what you would do in your home base, in the suburbs, to increase affordability and to welcome more minority individuals to your
Yes, thank you, Joyce.
neighborhood.
And obviously this is personal. I am a minority. I'm a Latino living in Brookline. And even more so, my dad used to work for HUD and used to oversee and audit public housing authorities, actually mostly in Taunton and Fall River. And so I saw firsthand, when going on site visits, the segregation that was caused by our public housing authorities. I saw redlining, the results of redlining firsthand. So redlining is still taking place even in Brookline and Newton and all of the communities in the Fourth. We need to end it immediately. We need to end exclusionary zoning practices. We need to create mixed use housing so that everyone has the chance to live in all the different suburbs. We need to incentivize our developers far more with low income tax credits, but even more so with middle income tax credits, with the National Housing Trust, with historical tax credits as well, and with housing choice vouchers. But we also have to look at our zoning, and we really need to make sure that we are changing all of our zoning laws to allow for the mixed use housing and communities that we so want. And we need to tie our housing into our transportation as well and create transit-oriented hubs and communities so people can get from their home to their places of employment as quickly as possible. And finally, a smaller sector within that is we really need to work on helping housing for the seniors and the elderly in all of our communities. And we can do that by changing our zoning laws and more incentives with our tax credits.
And yeah, we're still here.
Hello? Okay, Natalia. I'm probably butchering her name.
It's Natalia, but it's fine.
Natalia. Okay, I love the name. It's beautiful.
Thank you. So, you know, I also live in Brookline, and I have studied residential racial segregation and how that has an impact on well-being and health. And it is something that we have to take seriously and address it as a systemic racism challenge. You know, we need to be honest about the federal government's responsibility in terms of redlining, but also the wealth gap right now. You know, the fact that the net worth of a Black family in Boston is $8 versus $250,000 for a white family is mostly about home ownership. The gap between home ownership is huge, but also affordable rents. So both we need to address. The rental market, as well as the ability to buy into our communities, into Brookline. I believe the federal government needs to do a lot more to secure housing as a right we simply have failed on that part. So we need to expand vouchers. We need to ensure that we are building more affordable housing. And we need to make sure that we are actually thinking about what is driving people into different communities. And I think for many people also, Brookline and Newton are appealing because of the education system. So let's do something also for that, ensuring that the education quality is the same everywhere across our district. Let's make sure that people have opportunities to transportation, public transportation. So housing, I see it as integral to the entire well-being of a neighborhood. And as a public health expert, obviously the quality and the health of the housing, making sure that kids aren't experiencing asthma because, public housing is let to be, run down. All of those issues are also top of mind for me. Thank you.
Okay, and did that all four of them answer that question?
No, Isan is next.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. The housing issue is very personal to me. When I was an undocumented worker, I was a tenant who lived in a home without heat in the winter, in a home that was infested by mice. And I had a landlord who never showed up. And when I speak with our community in public housing in Brookline, they also tell me the landlord never shows up, and that is the federal government never shows up, HUD never shows up. Even the town that's trying to do the best they can with the limited revenue right now still doesn't meet the bill for the community. And as we know, over 90% of that community is Black and people of color. So here we are repeating the same cycle that was the result of not only redlining in Brookline, but also the result of just generational poverty and generational neglect. And to fix that, we need a massive plan. We don't need any more patchwork. And the massive plan that I have is called the Green Homes Guarantee, which is a big part of the Green New Deal. Because when we look at housing, we have to also understand it's integrated with healthcare, it's integrated with our transportation systems, and it's integrated with our environmental justice. So right now, communities in Brookline who live in housing also live in mold, live in homes that are not weathered, live in homes that don't have windows in the winter. And so we're gonna need to not just bring federal funding, but we're gonna need the federal government to actually repair these homes and weather them and create more opportunities for affordable housing by building millions of green homes across our country. And this district is in a dire need for that. I'm also a Federal Reserve regulator who worked post the financial crisis of 2008 and understand the predatory lending that we have right now in our housing sector, and understand how homeowners are also unable to pay their mortgages. We are facing another crisis, and we will need people who bring my expertise to be there on our behalf of the most vulnerable, and I can't wait to be there for you.
Okay, now we'll move on to the next set of questions here. This one will go to Ben first. While economic issues are of top concern to Black and brown business owners, matters pertaining to the criminal legal system and policing are of equal concern, given that Black and brown people cannot hide behind their professions to avoid negative interactions. As recently as last night, a Black man was attempting to defuse a situation in Wisconsin, was shot several times in the back by police officers and is in critical condition. This follows major efforts to reform police practices that harm communities of color. With this in mind, will you co-sponsor legislation that ends qualified immunity for law enforcement officers and that invests in a new vision of public safety being called for by advocates and protesters here in Massachusetts? Ben, you're first up on this one.
Thank you, Byron. And look, to Jacob Blake and his family, my thoughts and prayers are with him for a speedy and healthy recovery, physically and honestly mentally, as well as his kids had to be there to witness it. I think it's another tragic painful part in our history. So yes, absolutely, we need to abolish qualified immunity. Look, I have participated in over 21 different marches, rallies, and protests since the murder of George Floyd. I've spoken at the one in Fall River and in Milford. This has been at the top of our platform. So not only do we need to abolish qualified immunity, we need to condemn and eliminate racial profiling, police brutality, excessive use of force. We need to create certifications and national decertifications for our police officers and national policies and procedures for the use of force. We need to demilitarize our police. We need to ban facial recognition technology. We need to have body police cams on every police officer as well as in police vehicles too. We need a duty to intervene for our police officers, and we need to reallocate some of the resources we have towards our police. They don't need to be paid to be construction flaggers, and we need to put it towards engagement and education in our cities, in our towns, and in our education system.
Okay, Ihsan, you're next on this question.
Yes, we definitely need to end qualified immunity, and we must go much further than that. This militarization and policing of our streets has not made our communities safe. Too many Black lives have been lost to police brutality, to systemic racism. And look, this has been not a recent pain in our Black community. This has been historic. Our Black community has been living with the trauma of mass incarceration, living with the trauma of the war on drugs that has been the result of this punitive approach instead of having a society that is built on restorative justice and compassion. So we must fundamentally rethink public safety in our society. And we have to switch to a community-led safety model so that we not only preserve the lives of our Black community, but also to go further into reparations for our Black community and make up for the loss and for the hurt that our racist policies have caused. And that means that we also have to go and shift the funding away from policing and into investments in our communities, in housing, in education, in healthcare, and in mental health services. Look, this is something that I have seen in my past. I see that our communities are showing up right now, and they're being gassed by police, and they are facing secret police in our own streets. When I was in Morocco, my uncle wrote activist poetry, and the secret police took him away for 3 days, and he was brutalized and never came back the same again. So I understand what our country is going through right now, and we have to stand really strong, continue to organize in the streets, and bring in those voices into the policy making so that we have anti-racist policies to bring us all forward.
Thank you, Ihsan. Next, Dr. Natalia Linas.
Thanks so much, Byron. I, of course, agree that we must end qualified immunity right now. I lead a center at Harvard on health and human rights, and we struggle to get data around police-involved killings because there isn't a national data set. We rely on the media, on The Guardian, and people like you to ensure that we have access to information around police-involved killings, police-involved injuries, and that simply is not right. We need to hold people accountable, and we need to ensure that that accountability starts from counting every single person. I also believe that we need a massive reform of our mass incarceration system. Having worked at the United Nations for 10 years, I know that the US is such an outlier. We are 5% of the world's population, but we have 20% of the incarcerated people in the world. In Massachusetts, Black Massachusetts residents are 17%, but 50% of those incarcerated, and that is simply wrong. So we need reform not only in our policing, but we need to stop criminalizing poverty. We need to stop criminalizing mental illness. We need to stop criminalizing just basically being poor. That has to end, and we need to think creatively. So at the New York City Health Department, we worked with the NYPD on, say, opioid overdose crisis to ensure that people had access to naloxone. But for every $5 that went to a public health initiative, $4 went to the police department, $1 to the public health department. That is simply wrong. Our budgets should reflect our moral values, and our moral values tell us that people want healthcare, they want education, they want housing. So we have to have real reform, and the time for that is now, when people are on the streets demanding real change, calling that, you know, Black Lives Matter and racism kills directly through police violence, but also indirectly through neglect.
Thank you very much, Dr. Linas. Finally, Jessie Mermell, you have the last word on this one.
Well, I also want to send love and strength to Jacob Blake and his family and everyone who has been traumatized and re-traumatized by another act of police violence in this country, in Kenosha and beyond. We absolutely need to end qualified immunity. We need Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley's People's Justice Guarantee. There is so much more that we need to do to address the issues of our failed policing system when it comes to issues of police brutality and racial equity, and our failed criminal legal system. In addition to ending qualified immunity, we need to make it a crime to deny medical care to someone in police custody. We need to ban chokeholds and tear gas. We need to ban the broken windows policy. We need to make sure that we have a Justice Department that will investigate when law enforcement departments violate civil rights and engage in acts of police brutality. That is certainly not something that we have with President Trump in the White House. We need all civilian review boards so that when acts like this occur, we have neutral parties who are reviewing what has happened and making recommendations about where we go from here. We need to expand the use of body cameras. We absolutely need comprehensive and reliable data. And we need to reform the criminal legal system beyond just tackling these issues around police brutality and law enforcement, to make sure that justice truly exists, not in a split or bifurcated way, but for everyone in this country, ending the cradle to prison pipeline, ending for-profit prisons, abolishing the death penalty and cash bail. There are so many steps that we need to take. And I want to say that I understand as a white woman that my job will be to lead from behind, to listen, to amplify where I can be of use, to be an ally and an accomplice. I always say that I should aspire to be an ally, because I don't believe that anyone who isn't a member of a community can deem themselves to be an ally. That's something you have to earn. But I know there are so many incredible BIPOC leaders who have already made so clear what's needed in this space and how we can address the systemic racism that has plagued our law enforcement and criminal legal system intentionally for over 400 years. And if I can be of service, I stand ready to be an ally.
Thank you, Jessie. Thank you, Jessie Mermell. Joyce, you have the next question?
Here's another renegade question. I'd like to know from each of you, if you had one original structure, suggestion that no one else is doing to increase opportunities for minority and women businesses that nobody has said yet, what would it be? I want to start with Dr. Natalia.
So I don't know if it's nobody has said, but I'm known to be a synthetic thinker, and meaning let's pull from other issues. One of the big barriers that hasn't been framed as a barrier for business is what we're seeing right now in terms of schools being closed, daycare centers not being left to bail out. And as a working parent, I think that ensuring that we have UPK, universal pre-K, publicly available, and ensuring that our kids can get back to school would actually have a disproportionate benefit on women-owned and minority-owned businesses who are, in a time of COVID, so terrified. They have to either stay home to take care of their kids or, so we have to get right the education and the childcare plan. We are, as I mentioned before, I worked at the United Nations for many years. We are one of the wealthiest countries, and yet so many other countries provide both paid parental leave. They provide, even 16 weeks a year. They provide childcare at affordable rates. And really, for businesses to thrive and for Black-owned and women-owned businesses to thrive, we need to think about what is happening with the family life and that dynamic. And it has become so clear in COVID that it's impossible to stay home and parent and also run your business. So let's take that gap as part of our business model and ensure that we are providing childcare, early investments to good quality education, but also the care that families need to feel empowered, so that more of the innovation and more of the freedom and time can be used by business owners to do their job. Thanks so much.
plan, a specific different plan that's all yours. Did I say, Ben was next?
You were cut off in the beginning. Sorry, Joyce.
Okay, sorry. So I'm asking Ben to give me your own unique plan to help stimulate Black and minority businesses.
Yeah, I think there's three things that I want to focus on. Number one, we have to provide free adult vocational education for everyone, so that people get the skills and trainings they need in order to get higher quality jobs, in order the skills they can do to actually succeed in their jobs they have, in order to move into new industries as well, so they can get higher quality jobs and higher paying jobs. That's number one. Number two, I think we need to get to the point where we're not just suggesting, but mandating that our Fortune 500, our private companies, our nonprofits, and our government boards and executive suites have significant percentage of diversity, comprised of diversity of their members, both board members and also in the executive suites. And I think the other piece that I want to mention is we really got to all work together. That seems like nothing innovative, but we're not doing it. The issues with the Black community are so interconnected to other issues throughout the entire country. And some of the issues we're talking about tonight, we need all of those pieces to be interrelated and interconnected. And we need to all be working to lift everyone up. And we're not talking about that now. We're all siloed. We need to all come together.
Sorry. All right, Jessie?
Hey guys, it's Natalia.
Can I call you right back?
Oh, the perils of the living in the COVID era.
Listen, if there isn't at least one dog or kid interruption, is it really a COVID event? I don't think so. Listen, Joyce, I don't know that this is a policy idea, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently. And I think it's something that deserves a lot of attention. You know, we're seeing businesses across the country post beautiful branded Instagram pages about Black Lives Matter and launch diversity and inclusion committees. And it's all, you know, we hope wonderful and moving us in a good direction. But I don't think we're having a real conversation about what's going on behind the scenes when it comes to the advocacy that the business community engages in. And I say this as someone who ran the state's progressive business organization for the past nearly 5 years. What's going on with businesses and the government relations that they engage in? Are they also using their platform and the lobbying they do to advance ending qualified immunity, for example? Are they also calling for the zoning changes that are necessary to invest in more affordable housing? Are they buying, you know, $10,000 plate or $10,000 a pop tables at big fancy dinners whenever we have big fancy dinners again, or dues to organizations that are actively opposing the legislation that we need to move forward when it comes to racial equity in this country? I realize this isn't a policy idea, but it is something that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. And I think it's the next level of conversation when it comes to the business community's role in advancing equity. What if a business organization or a business itself, in addition to advocating for, you know, what might be necessary for, you know, your ability to do business, also took it upon itself to advocate for something like raising the minimum wage or paid family and medical leave or closing the achievement gap? Policies that we know make real progress when it comes to racial inequities in this country. What if the business community used its muscle to advance that type of good, that type of fight for equity? There's a lot of potential here and there's a lot of missed opportunity. And that's a conversation I don't hear a lot of people having, and it's something that I want to raise up as part of this conversation.
Yeah. It's on.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of the problems actually, more than the solutions here. I think that waiting on businesses to make up their mind, especially when they have deeply embezzled from those same communities that have been lacking economic opportunity, I think that's an idea that, you know, it's an idea, but this is the federal government job, right? This is where we bring the equity into policy. This is not when we beg businesses to do the right thing by us. This is where we actually make sure that the right thing is done by the people. And to do that, and I'll give you an example. The Federal Reserve has a program to help communities who have had lack of economic opportunity, bring revival to the local economy. And they have been helping 2 cities in the district, Taunton and Fall River, and multiple other gateway cities across the state. And they brought partnerships across, organizations that are nonprofits, across businesses, to work together and go into a challenge to really bring economic equity and opportunity. You see, the problem that they faced was that, number one, people were jaded because they've been bit for so many times. They didn't know what is the intent of this partnership. So there needed to be a build of trust. And to build the trust, you have to physically show up in that community and include the members of that community into the dialogue, into the coalition. Don't rely on businesses to make up their minds. No, you bring the voices of the parents, of the single moms, of the janitors, of the nurses, of the teachers, and you bring them into that fold and into that coalition, and coming to where they are, understanding what time of the day they can be available, whether you need to bring food, whether you need to bring stipends to help them for that 1 hour of representing their communities or 2 hours a week. This is the work that we need to do. This is what I've been doing in this district, is really tending to the needs of the people, not of those who have been, trying to do the right thing, but answering to their profits first.
Okay, well, thank you, candidates, for all your responses. We're getting toward the end here now of this segment, at least. So I invite all the candidates to deliver 1 minute closing statements, and please try to do your best to keep it to 1 minute. If it feels like it's getting a little too long, it probably is. We were going to start with you, Dr. Natalia Linas.
Thanks so much for having us tonight. And we're in the midst of a global pandemic. And as someone who has the expertise, as a public health leader, as someone who has worked my entire career to prepare for pandemics, but also address systemic racism in health outcomes, whether we're talking about maternal mortality rates that are 3 times higher for Black moms than white moms, or cancer rates, or just premature mortality. I know that data can help us move forward, and I will step in to ensure that this recovery is actually equitable. I have the skills, I have the experience, I have done the work at the UN, at the New York City Health Department, and currently leading a center on health and human rights. I will make sure that this recovery is not going to lead us down a path where the future is actually grim, but one where we can actually be proud to be part of one community. So I hope that many of you will vote for me this September 1st or before. And if you want to learn more, I am online on Zoom every day at noon to answer questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Natalia. Next, we have Jessie Mermell.
Well, Byron, Joyce, Shagun, everyone at BECMA and all the partner organizations, thank you for organizing this tonight and for the opportunity to be with you. I hope folks have walked away this evening believing that I am the candidate with the vision, the experience, the team to deliver on the fair, just, and equitable path forward that the people of the 4th Congressional District need and deserve. For the past 20 plus years, I have been on the front lines of fighting to make sure that we have a healthcare system that works for everyone and an economy that works for everyone, leading the state's socially responsible progressive business organization, partnering with incredible colleagues and allies like BECMA to address the issues in our economy that are disproportionately impacting Black and brown business owners and Black and brown families. I've been on the front lines of negotiating the strongest paid family and medical leave law in the country, an issue that we know is a racial justice issue. Fighting to increase the minimum wage to $15, a racial justice issue. Fighting for equitable investments in education, transportation, and housing, all racial justice issues. I'm so proud to have built the broadest, most diverse grassroots coalition in this race, with support from people like Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and Attorney General Maura Healey, and some of the most diverse worker organizations in the state, everyone from the Coalition for Social Justice in Fall River to SEIU. I am grateful for the opportunity to be with you tonight. For those who live in the 4th Congressional District, I ask for your vote on or before September 1st, and I look forward to being your partner on these issues when I'm in Congress.
Thank you, Jessie. Ben Siegel, your 1 minute closing statement, please.
Thank you, Byron. And thank you again to the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts for hosting tonight's forum. Look, if you believe we need a leader who's a bridge builder, a connector, and a unifier, then I ask for your support and your vote if you're in the 4th District. If you believe we need a leader who doesn't just talk about fighting and eliminating racism to gain your vote, but someone who's done the work in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion for years, then I ask for your support and your vote. If you believe it's time that we elect a diverse leader like myself, who'd be the first Latino ever elected to Congress from Massachusetts, and who truly understands the diverse perspectives of our community, racially, geographically, and economically, then I ask for your support and vote. And if you believe we need a leader who is going to listen to you, understand you, stand with you, and amplify the voice of everyone in the district and not just a privileged few, I ask that you go to our website at bensiegelforcongress.com, join our We the Fourth movement, because we are all in this together. And I hope to have your vote now up until September 1st. Thank you.
Okay, Ben, thank you very much. Finally, Ihsan Lecky, your closing remarks. 1 minute, please.
Thank you. Thank you again so much, BECMA, for organizing this forum. Look, this fight has always been a top-down fight. Our district, the 4th, is very heavily gerrymandered, where we have some of the wealthiest people in the Commonwealth grouped with some, actually in the country, grouped some of the poorest people in the Commonwealth. And this needs a congresswoman who comes with that deep lived experience of living through poverty in the richest country in the world, of being a woman of color who's been sidelined, who's been othered, who understand what it's like for somebody to tell you your skin is too dark to be American, or that your hair is too ethnic to speak with white farmers. So look, the experience on the resume, sure, we got that. I worked at the Federal Reserve. I'm a Wall Street regulator. I fought the biggest, most corrupt corporations on Wall Street, and I cannot wait to fight them again in Congress and get them out of the way so that they don't destroy our economy again, and so that we can pass policies like Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, universal family care, universal housing for everyone. But look, this is about the lived experiences, being somebody who has survived sexual abuse, gun violence, who has survived being poor. That's what we need in Congress, because when it comes to the policy making, it's about what we can see behind the words, what we can see behind the scenes, and how we can bring our communities together, being good listeners and good messengers. So I hope to earn your vote. I hope to earn your participation in this last week. Go on our website and volunteer. I'm so proud to have been endorsed by Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, and as well as Representative Nika Alaguardo, and a coalition of multiracial, multi-generational movements that has uplifted this campaign and the people it looks to represent the most. Thank you so much for having me.
Ihsan Lecky, thank you very much. Joyce?
You just called me Ilhan Lecky. Thank you.
Lecky, well, maybe you will be lucky. We'll see.
I look forward to work with her. Thanks.
Joyce? I think we have a break coming up, Joyce. Well, I'll take it, I guess. That concludes our first set, the first set of our candidate forum for the 4th Congressional District. We now have a brief 2-minute intermission as we transition to the next group of candidates. We'll be back momentarily. Thank you all for participating, and good luck to all of you. May the best person win. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Byron. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Shagun.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Byron Barnett. Welcome back to the Black Business Month Candidate Forum for the 4th Congressional District. Now, if you're just tuning in, my name is Byron Barnett, as I've said, from Channel 7, host of Urban Update, and I'm serving as a co-moderator tonight. My partner in crime here is Joyce Ferriabough, who joins us as well. Joyce?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Black Business Month Candidates Forum for the 4th Congressional District, sponsored by BECMA. Candidates had been divided into 2 sets, and in this set, the last 4 candidates have a 1-minute opening to introduce yourself and to tell why you are running, an elevator speech, so to speak. So our first.
Joyce, why don't I just quickly introduce everybody? Because of the large number of candidates, we, as you know, had to divide them into 2 groups. So one set has concluded, and we're starting the second set. And now we are welcoming Jake Auchincloss and Becky Grossman, Alan Casey, and Chris Zanetos to join us. Each candidate, as Joyce just said, will have a minute to introduce themselves. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for coming. And we're going to get going on this. We'll have questions after that. And we will start with, we'll start with Jake for your first 1-minute statement, Jake.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this, and I appreciate the chance to have this conversation. My name is Jake Auchincloss. I am a Marine veteran. I'm a city councilor in Newton, and recently I'm a new dad. And I'm running for Congress because Donald Trump's America is not the America I fought for as a Marine captain, and it's not the America I've worked for as a city councilor in Newton. And at a time when we have a dangerous and hateful administration at the White House, one that is explicitly racist and does not stand for America's founding principles of inclusion and justice and opportunity for all, we need more than ever strong leadership in Congress to represent our values. As a member of Congress, I will go toe-to-toe with the NRA. I'm a former Marine officer who worked with Americans from all walks of life, white, black, brown, and I know that no civilian needs to own a weapon of war, and that the presence of guns throughout our community life disproportionately affects Black and brown communities. I will also be a champion for an inclusive economic recovery. As a city councilor in Newton, I've taken hard votes to build more housing, to make us a more inclusive city, to green our infrastructure, to create jobs, to transition to a clean energy economy. And as a member of Congress, I'm going to do the same thing. I will be a champion for small business, and I'll be a champion for racial justice and inclusion.
Okay, all right. Jake Auchincloss, thank you very much. Becky Grossman, you're up next.
Thank you so much for having me this evening. I am Becky Grossman, and I'm a Newton City Councilor, but the job that I cherish most is being a mom to my 2 kids. My daughter, Madeline, is 9 and recently finished 3rd grade, and my son, Jack, is 6 and recently finished kindergarten. I am running for Congress with the fierce urgency of a mom fed up by what is going on in this country and determined to make change. I wake up every day thinking about what is going to protect our families today and in the long term. And I'm so glad we are having this forum because systemic racism is real, and racial justice and economic justice are inextricably linked. When I'm asked what committees I want to serve on in Congress, I always talk first about the Small Business Committee, because I'm committed to using every resource that we have to support businesses and under-resourced communities throughout Massachusetts, certainly in the 4th District, and believe that that is a moral imperative and an economic imperative. Providing technical assistance and capital to these small businesses is going to be one of my top priorities in Congress. And I'm in this race because I'm a mom deeply concerned about what the world is that we are leaving for our kids. Tackling racial and economic inequality is a central component of leaving the world better for the next generation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Becky. Next, we have Alan Casey.
Good evening. I'm Alan KZ. I'm the father of Mirabelle, who's 18, just graduated from Brookline High School, and Reese, who is 12 and just finished 6th grade at the Lincoln School. I'm also married to the extraordinary Vanessa Kirsch, who, like me, has spent her life in public service. I'm the co-founder of City Year. The fight for racial justice has been a major cause of my life. That's why my friends and I invented City Year more than 30 years ago, and we started in Boston because of our history of systemic racism in Boston. You know, in the 1960s, we changed the laws, extraordinary Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act, but you only change hearts and minds through experience. And we thought that national service, bringing young people together from all different backgrounds, could help complete the civil rights movement. Today, City Year is in 29 cities across America. It's in South Africa and the United Kingdom. We serve 200,000 school children every single day. We were the model for the AmeriCorps program. We knew we had to build a model and a movement. I worked closely with Senator Kennedy, President Clinton, and President Obama to grow the AmeriCorps movement such that 1.1 million people have now served. And that's the experience that I will bring to Congress. I also built a coalition that beat Tom DeLay when he tried to kill the AmeriCorps program. I'm incredibly excited about BECMA and the leadership you're showing and what you've already achieved. I met with Glenn Lloyd when you were first starting out. I'm close to your founders, Glenn and Daryl, and others. I will work with you to expand your mission, and I can't wait to have this conversation. Thank you very much.
Okay, and thank you, Alan Casey. Chris Donatos is not here, so we're going to move on without him. He was invited, but he's not here, but we're going to continue on. Joyce, I think you got the first question for the first round here.
Yes, thank you. Housing has been very much in the news, particularly the lack of minority access to not just affordable housing, but housing writ large in the area that you represent. Can you tell me how you would increase the opportunity for more minorities to live where you live? It starts with, let's start with Becky.
Thank you. This has been at the very cornerstone of my work as a Newton City Councilor, and I am incredibly proud to have been a passionate supporter for increasing the supply of housing in my home community of Newton, especially in passionately supporting the Northland project that the City Council recently approved, which stands to be the single biggest infusion of affordable housing, certainly in Newton's recent history, if not in its entire history. If we are going to tackle racial inequities, housing justice has got to be at the core of what we're doing. This is about a child having a home, about being able to grow up in the safety and security of having a roof over a child's head, a family's head. We have families in our communities, including in Newton and certainly throughout every city and town, that are, we have examples of families who are living in hotels and families in our communities who are homeless. And we also have families who may have a roof over their head, but unaffordable rent is eating up very disproportionate amounts of their income, and that's not tenable. So first of all, in addition to embracing multifamily transit-oriented development in Newton, in every community throughout the 4th District, that is absolutely essential. And I think also, though, that the federal government has a much more proactive role to play in incentivizing cities and towns to add to and diversify their housing stock, and to confront the legacy of redlining, which continues to shape our communities head on, using the tools of the federal government to incentivize and reward zoning reform, pushing cities and towns to invite people in, and making sure that certain communities aren't closed off.
Okay, I think the next question, the same question goes to Alan Casey.
Thank you. It's an excellent question. So I am the only candidate in this race that actually has put together a plan for all 34 cities and towns. I've talked to hundreds of voters to hear their concerns so I can be ready to deliver as their congressperson. I've heard a lot about affordable housing from across the district. And I would do several things. First of all, we have to build more housing. And we have to support nonprofit developers. One of the first partners we had when we started City Europe back in 1988 was Urban Edge. And we work closely with them. And I've been working in public housing ever since. So we have to move from commercial developers to more nonprofit developers. Secondly, we need to repeal the Faircloth Amendment, which is absurd that we can't build more public housing until we have somebody leave a unit in public housing. The answer here is more housing. Fourth, we need to change Section 8 so people can actually accumulate the wealth so they can have the first month, last month in security deposit. We shouldn't penalize people so they can actually move out of public housing when they choose to. Finally, we need to make sure that the federal government is actually spending the money to build more affordable housing and give access to people who need it. These are some of the things that I would do. And I have a lot of experience in this area for more than 30 years. Thank you.
Okay. I think, Chris, you have the next, Jake has the next shot at this question. Go ahead, Jake.
It's a superb question. It's the work I've been doing for 5 years as a city councilor in Newton, a city that is my hometown that I love, but that has occasionally failed to live up to its progressive ideals in the way that it approaches housing, which is a core measure of inclusion. And Newton, like many other cities and towns throughout Massachusetts, has been subject to redlining and exclusionary zoning. One of the reasons I have the support of Josephine McNeil, who's been a champion of housing and civil rights and R.L. Tennant Award laureate to the Newton-Ebert Chamber of Commerce, is because she's seen me over the last 5 years argue for a more inclusive and welcoming city through housing policy. As she told me at her portrait a few weeks ago, housing policy is racial justice policy. You cannot talk about one without talking about the other. And that does not just apply to the city council level, that applies to the federal government level as well. I'm a strong proponent of Elizabeth Warren's housing plan that she put forward on the campaign trail, in large measure because it calls for both carrots and sticks in building more housing. And building more housing is the single most effective way we're going to make housing more affordable and more accessible to all. But it's not sufficient. We also need to not just end the practice of exclusionary zoning and redlining. We've got to proactively make homeownership more accessible to minority communities, because it's the most important way that kids get access to a high quality education. It's the most important way that generations are able to create and transfer wealth. So it's not just stop doing the bad stuff. It's also proactively invest in homeownership for minority communities. That's the next step to build off Elizabeth Warren's housing plan.
Okay, thank you, Jake. Next question is going to, we'll start with Alan first on this question, Alan Casey. Representative Ayanna Pressley and Senator Cory Booker's baby bonds proposal is the American Opportunity Accounts Act. That's estimated to reduce the racial wealth gap from 15 to 1 to 1.6 to 1. Would you co-sponsor this proposal? And are there other proposals that your campaign is making to reduce the racial wealth gap? Alan Casey, you're first on this one.
Thank you, Byron. I actually love this proposal, but I have a little different take on it that I have proposed. I call it Restore the Dream Accounts. What I want to do is for every child born, not just put $1,000, but put $15,000 into that account for every child, paid for by the estate tax. And that will accumulate by the time that child is 19 with just very average market returns. It's worth $50,000. I want to make it an American Dream account. I want it to be able to be used for paying for college. It would more than cover student debt, or for young people who aren't going to college for apprenticeship and job training programs. I want it to be able to be used for down payment on your first home, to be a small business or not-for-profit entrepreneur, for lifelong learning, for emergencies, and even saving for retirement, and it would be lifelong. But to get it, you just do 1 year of national service. The reason I'm proposing this is I think it's like a bookend to Social Security. During the Depression, we realized elderly poverty was a crisis. We did not cover people of color or domestic workers, which was a huge error. So I propose this because I think it would both stimulate national service, but also give every single young person at least $50,000. I think you will never be able to cut the estate tax if we propose this, because it will apply to everyone. And it will give every young person a jumpstart on the American dream. I think it's a big, bold idea, like we did in the 30s. So that's my alternative. Thank you.
Okay, Alan, thank you very much. Jake, you're next on this one.
I love this bill. In fact, I've referenced it a couple of times before. This bill to me is acutely addressing the core American promise, which is that the circumstances of your birth should not determine the condition of your life. Giving kids $1,000 when they're born, adding up to $2,000 annually for kids from a low-income family could, for kids from the lowest income families, get them a nest egg of up to $46,000 on average by the time they reach maturity. That is a significant leveling of the playing field, and I think it addresses exactly what America is meant to be. And I am also a huge supporter of using the estate tax to fund that, because philosophically, it is aligned with our values. If you pass on and you're super wealthy, you can't give all that money to just your kids. You've got to pay it forward to other people's kids as well, because we are one society and our fates are inextricably linked. So I'm a strong supporter of this bill. I would be happy to co-sponsor it. In fact, I would co-sponsor it as the next member of Congress. And I think the funding source from the estate tax is entirely appropriate. I'm glad that you raised this issue, because it's one close to my heart.
Okay, Jake Auchincloss, thank you very much. And Becky Grossman, you have the final say on this one.
I wholeheartedly support this proposal. We need to tackle the racial wealth gap head on. This is a tangible action step that we can take that can really make a dent, knowing that there is much more that we're going to need to do in addition. And you asked what else we would do in addition. One policy that I really want to lift up that I think is really important here is investing in early childhood in the first days of a child's life. And that means not only universal pre-K, but also affordable, accessible childcare for every family. We know how the inequities that continue to grow over the course of a child's life begin in those very early days, how affordable childcare is out of reach for far too many. And in this time of pandemic, this issue hasn't gotten nearly enough attention and investment. So I really think that if we're talking about tackling the racial wealth gap head on, that we've got to be talking about education justice and childcare justice and what the federal government must do to be investing right away, because not only is it the right thing to do, it also will pay dividends over the course of a child's life through their education into high school and beyond, higher education, and certainly in the menu of options that they will have as adults in their lives.
Thank you, Becky. Joyce.
Ask each of you to give me a specific tailored plan that you have and that you would execute to support and boost minority businesses. And and I'm starting with Jake.
Yeah, well, I'm a big supporter of Senator Cory Booker's and Senator Kamala Harris's Minority Business Resiliency Act. I think it's exactly the right approach to this. Part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, it makes permanent the Minority Business Development Agency, and it would provide grants. It would try to help level the playing field for businesses that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. And it basically institutionalizes, as part of the federal government's mandate, the idea that we need to be doing specialized outreach and support for minority-owned businesses. So that's a bill that I would look forward to supporting, and a bill that I would help champion in Congress.
You know, from scratch, you're not supporting anyone else, but your own developed one. I'll give you another minute for that, because it's just so important, because we understand the stress levels for minority businesses. But I want your own plan. I'm happy you support the others, but tell me your plan.
Well, I think that supporting that plan and then helping to make that plan, put that into effect for the Massachusetts 4th is an important part of this. And as a city councilor here in Newton, I have built coalitions consistently to help effect reforms that benefit our city as a place that's meant to be welcoming and inclusive for all. And as a member of Congress, I'm going to do the same thing for minority-owned businesses in the Massachusetts 4th. I think that this bill goes a long way towards helping to redress some of the challenges that the federal government has had in supporting minority businesses. And on the ground, I'm going to be someone who's engaged with business owners to hear what they need and how that bill might be tailored to their purposes, whether that means addressing or changing the Paycheck Protection Program, making sure that they have the protective equipment that they need, making sure that the child care reforms that they need to allow them to go back to work are in effect. These are all parts of being a responsive member of Congress with good constituent services.
Thank you. Okay. Alan?
Yes, thank you. I actually have proposed a different idea. The PPP program didn't work. It didn't go to minority-owned businesses. I proposed right at the beginning, and I actually got Senator Mark Warner to introduce it as legislation with Senator Bernie Sanders and Doug Jones, and Congresswoman Jayapal has introduced something similar. I called it emergency wage support. What I said is, rather than having a convoluted loan program, because it wouldn't go to people who don't have the big banking relationships or have the collateral for a loan, we should pay people directly to keep people in their jobs at 80% of their salaries so that they wouldn't go on unemployment. And then once the COVID crisis lifted, the healthcare crisis, they could reopen their businesses. I still want to have this idea because we have lost so many minority business enterprises already. It's a tragedy. We're losing Main Street. We're losing the lifeblood of our communities. They're closing not because of anything that they did wrong, but because of the pandemic. This also applies to disasters like wildfires or hurricanes or earthquakes, et cetera. So I will fight for that. But we also have to change federal contracting. Less than 1% of the contracts go to minority business enterprises. I would ask for transparency, and I would say that we should guarantee contracts to minority business enterprises as well. There's a lot of money the federal government spends. It's the same problem at the state level. We need to support our minority business enterprises, and I have an independent, unique proposal to do that, and I'll fight hard for it. And I've already built relationships in Congress to get it done.
Becky?
This question is so important. It is outrageous that we have completely left Black and minority-owned businesses behind, certainly during this crisis, and that the PPP should have mandated significant technical assistance to minority businesses to access the relief that they need so desperately. And I hope to see that in the next round of relief. We need to be honest about the fact that small businesses owned by minorities do not have access to the same banking relationships and have been under-resourced and underbanked for far too long. It's one of the reasons that very early on in this campaign, I made a commitment, if I'm so fortunate as to be elected, is to have a member of my staff whose priority focus is economic development in this district. Certainly in the parts of the district that have been struggling economically the most, both in coming out from the 2008 recession, certainly now, and certainly with respect to small businesses that are owned by minorities, by women, by veterans, by the disabled, which have been underbanked for far too long. Going forward, in addition to providing access to capital and to the technical training that businesses need, I think we should be providing substantial grants to these businesses, because the reality is many are not in a position to repay loans. And we also need to tackle the inequalities that are related to internet access. And part of what I'm talking about when I mention technical assistance is just that. In under-resourced communities, many of which are in this district, there is inadequate access to the internet. Without that, you can't work remotely, you can't educate your children remotely, you cannot access telehealth, and you certainly can't keep your small business going by having an online footprint. So the combined effects of that lack of access are devastating and something that I am laser focused on fixing if I'm elected to Congress.
Okay, and for our final question, I kind of wanted to combine a couple of questions here. And I think a couple of you have touched on them, but I want to delve a little bit deeper into it. This one from Ralph from Braintree. He's a Black Economic Council member. He notes that reports in last year indicate that only 1% of Boston and state contracts go to certified Black businesses, and we know the federal numbers are poor as well. What would you do to not only ensure that Black and other minority businesses get access to federal contracts, but these businesses would also get contracts from the cities and towns as well. Also, if you could also talk about the situation with the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, that was touched on a little bit here, but the last reports we have that 99% of Black businesses and 90% of minority businesses did not access PPP in the first round. If elected, what will you do to get needed financial relief to these businesses? And is there current legislation you would co-sponsor if reintroduced in the next session of Congress? Becky, we will start with you on this question.
Thank you. It is a scandal that so few dollars flow to minority-owned businesses here in Massachusetts that desperately need that business and need those contracts. And we have seen the data over and over again, year after year, demonstrating that a tiny fraction of contract work and municipal and state work especially is going to minority-owned businesses. First, we have got to provide massive amounts of technical assistance to these businesses so that they can bid and compete for these contracts that should have been provided in the PPP program and should be a requirement if we have a next round of relief, and I think we need a next round of relief. And then we need to hold municipal and state authorities accountable, because all of the excuses in the world are not going to take away the fact that year after year, minority-owned businesses are getting the short end of the stick when it comes to contracts. And I am committed to holding our elected officials, to our public officials, holding them accountable at every level of government, because this is a critical component in not only building healthy businesses and good paying jobs, but leveling the playing field and narrowing the racial wealth gap.
All right, Becky, thank you. Alan?
Yeah, so I already addressed the PPP program, and I have an alternative for that. There's a lot we can do here. So first of all, I would require full transparency. For any city and town that gets federal money, they have to publish the contracts that are going to minority-owned businesses. Secondly, I would support the expansion of organizations like Entrepreneurs for All, where they support entrepreneurs. It's majority women and people of color. Desh Despande and Raj Melville, I've worked with them. They're both supporting me. They're already in the South Coast, and I'd like to expand it across the district and even across the country like we did with City Year. Third, I am in full support of Jeffrey Canada's proposal to have $1 billion in promised neighborhoods, which would attack redlining and poverty. And a lot of that work would go to minority-owned businesses. I've worked with Jeff Canada, and I've worked with Hubie Jones and Mosi Kakobian on a higher ground. We already have a model right in Boston. Fifth, I want to revamp the SBA and make sure that it has funding for minority-owned businesses. It's giving technical support. We need a 21st century SBA. Finally, I want to have transparency for venture capitalists. Less than 1% of venture capital goes to people of color. It's an outrage. And also with philanthropy, less than 4% of philanthropy in our country is going to organizations with leaders of color. I want to require in 990s that every foundation report what percentage of their grants are going to leaders of color, and I want to push them to make sure that it gets to at least a proportion of the people in the population. There's a lot we could do here. I have a lot of experience on this from my work in neighborhoods going back for 30 years with City and other organizations, and I will fight for it so that we do have economic and racial justice in our society. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. And finally, Jake Auchincloss, you get to have the last word on this question.
This is about expanding opportunity for communities that have long had to struggle against an unfair system. First, we've got to expand the ability to get these certifications in the first place. That means stronger oversight from Congress over the administration of those, streamlining and simplifying the process to gain the certification. And then as a member of Congress, being a convener and at times an arm twister to get the cities and towns in the Massachusetts Fourth to implement their own quota system for meeting minority-owned business contracts, and for also bringing people together. A lot of times the job of a member of Congress is not to be the smartest person in the room, but just to get the right people in the room to make good things happen. And that can happen by introducing entrepreneurs with local elected officials. I've done that work as a city councilor in Newton. I certainly can do it as a member of Congress. The Small Business Administration under President Obama had a council on underserved communities that was working on gaining or improving the access to capital and credit for minority-owned businesses. Obviously, under the Trump administration, that's been cast aside. We need to reinvigorate, refund, and renew that program because it's an important one. And then finally, I want to talk about transportation because transportation is so important to me. I think it's so important for creating opportunity in Massachusetts for businesses, frankly, from all walks of life. Our transportation system in Massachusetts is not just detrimental to the environment, it's racist. It tells Black and brown communities their time and their public health matters less than anybody else's, and it locks those communities out of opportunity. I've called for reinventing public transit in Massachusetts, a new Eisenhower plan, but not for highways, for all electric regional rail and bus rapid transit, better infrastructure for cycling and walking. That's going to create great conditions for business and especially great conditions for Black and brown entrepreneurs.
Okay, we will just have one more question here, and that has to do with qualified immunity and policing situation. This is one of the big concerns of folks in the Black community. As you know, last night a Black man was attempting to defuse a situation in Wisconsin. He was shot several times in the back by police officers and is in critical condition. This follows major efforts to reform police practices that harm communities of color. With this in mind, will you co-sponsor legislation that ends qualified immunity for law enforcement officers and that invests in a new vision of public safety being called for by advocates and protesters here in Massachusetts? Jake, I'll start with you on that one.
The situation with Jacob Blake is horrific. It's the latest in a long and heartbreaking series of racist violence. Nobody should be protected for breaking the law. Nobody should be protected for propagating hate. I don't care what their title is or from police officer to president of the United States for that matter. We absolutely need to take action to hold those who carry the mantle of law enforcement to a higher standard. As the chair of public safety, as a city councilor in Newton, I've helped quarterback the Independent Police Reform Task Force. It's reimagining public safety in Newton. And I'm excited by the example of Newton, but also of other cities throughout the country. Minneapolis, which has really been on the vanguard of this in response to the horrific killing of George Floyd, as they look to reimagine public safety. And I think that they're going to be an example to cities and towns throughout the Massachusetts Fourth with their recommendations. And I'm looking keenly to see how we can think about public safety more broadly, how we can transfer functions and funding from police departments to other health and human services functions, and how we can improve certification, training, liability insurance for police officers so that they are better prepared to do their job and better held to account.
Jake, just as a follow-up here, what about ending qualified immunity?
I don't believe that there should be immunity for those who break the law. Absolutely not. If you commit a crime, you should be held accountable for that. There are instances where those who are in public office or those who carry the mantle of public authority can be shielded from civil liability, but not criminal liability.
Let's move along with Becky on that one.
Thank you. I absolutely support ending qualified immunity, and my heart is with Jacob Blake's family. And when I think about what he experienced, that horrific act, and his children present, it absolutely breaks my heart. Black people are being targeted by law enforcement with stunning frequency and precision. And we cannot allow this total disregard for Black lives to continue. So yes, I absolutely support ending qualified immunity for police. I also support a broad set of other reforms, including a deep and thoughtful examination of how we spend our money on policing while investing more in rehabilitation, in mental health, and in education services, in demilitarizing the police, in a federal ban on chokeholds, and in reimagining a public safety system that makes everyone actually safe and feel safe. And we also have to get serious about criminal justice reform. So many people, by the time they enter the system, have already been failed by the other systems in our society. So yes, this includes bail reform and sentencing reform, but we have to go far beyond that. We have an opportunity to help someone who enters the criminal justice system turn their life around by offering mental health and social services, and we are missing that opportunity. And I am going to stand up and fight for these ideas in moving forward and in tackling the racism that happens in every police department across this country as the next member of Congress for the 4th District.
Okay, thank you, Becky. Alan?
Yes, the tragedy with Jacob Blake is another in a two-long series. Again, our thoughts and prayers have to go out to his family for him to hopefully recover, and the people who did this have to be held accountable. I'm absolutely for ending qualified immunity. I want to go much farther. I put out a criminal justice reform package of proposals back in March. And here's what I called for. We don't have a criminal justice system right now. We have a criminal retribution system, and we have to change that. We started working at the Blackstone School in the South End more than 32 years ago. We have to end the school to prison pipeline. I have seen this firsthand. Little black and brown boys, ages 5 and 6, being suspended from school because the educators don't know how to teach them and empower them. That has to stop. We have more black men in prison today, 729,000, than we had in slavery in 1820. That has to end. We need to end private prisons. It's an abomination that people are making money off of keeping people in jail. We need to end the death penalty. We need to reform our bail laws and end the requirement for cash bail. We need to legalize marijuana, and anybody who's in prison for a marijuana offense possession should be released. We should restore Pell Grants to prisoners so that actually it can be a system where people can have restorative justice and get ready to reenter society with a prospect for a job. I proposed a federal jobs guarantee. I proposed expanding national service to 1 million people. We have had people in city here who've come out of the prison system and have turned their lives around because they've given opportunity. I've worked closely with Youth Build that does that too, and with ROCA. There's a whole set of things that I'd like to do, including forming an American Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission so that we take the energy from our streets, this extraordinary awakening, and actually get major legal policy cultural change in our country. I proposed that with Cornell William Brooks, the former head of the NAACP, and I'm honored that he is supporting me in this race. I've been working on this my whole life, and I will fight incredibly hard to make sure we finally achieve it.
Okay, thank you, Alan. And Chris Zanetto's the 8th candidate has just logged on, so we'll get him in on this last question here. Chris, again, will you co-sponsor legislation that ends qualified immunity for law enforcement officers and that invests in a new vision of public safety being called for by advocates and protesters here in Massachusetts? Chris.
Thanks, Byron. And first of all, my apologies for being extremely late. We had a little scheduling snafu, but I really do appreciate the opportunity. I'm so happy I could join for at least a bit here. So I fully support the Justice and Policing Act, which has been put forth by Senators Booker and hopefully Senator Harris, who's hopefully going to become our next vice president. And as part of that, it talks about reforming and eliminating qualified immunity and making it more possible for civil action as well. We have to, of course, go further. And, as Alan calls this an awakening, I think we have to take an advantage of this to drive much further for getting a much greater transparency around the data. But also, I think we've got to recognize that we cannot stop there, that we cannot achieve social justice without economic justice. There are layer upon layer of obstacles that our citizens who are Black and citizens who are Latinx face that many of us do not. Starting with internet access to educational system, access to healthcare services, access to good transportation. And we have to work aggressively to eliminate all of those obstacles so we actually have opportunity, liberty, and justice for all. And as I said, without economic justice as well, we will not achieve what we want to achieve.
Okay, and Joyce?
Give Chris one particular question to answer before we go to closing, and that is, what would you do to help minority businesses succeed?
Yes. So,
Chris?
so that is a large challenge. And I think one of the things that we need to do is continue programs to make sure that minority businesses can get appropriate access to government contracts, whether they're state contracts or federal contracts. I think we've got to continue to have those programs and frankly, put more energy into those and expand them that make those contracts visible to and ensure that minority businesses have an opportunity to get access and actually win these contracts. I think beyond that, we have to make sure that loans and banking relationships are fully available to these businesses. One of the things that I've done during this campaign is bike through every town in our district, talking to over 100 small businesses. Some of them owned by minorities and many, unfortunately, not, of course. And what I found is that they cannot access things like the PPP loan because they don't have the right relationships. And this is a legacy of, certainly for minority-owned businesses, the legacy of some of the redlining and other institutionalized racist policies that have been implemented in our financial system. So as well as attacking the redlining itself, I think we've got to go further to make sure that our banks are incented and driven to create the right relationships for these businesses to be able to succeed.
Okay, all right. Okay, Joyce.
Sorry, we're now at closing statements. You have 1 minute to give a closing statement, and I'd like to start with Becky.
Thank you so much for having me for this incredibly important conversation this evening. When I attended protests and rallies across this district, I heard parent after parent after parent, especially of young Black men, come up to the microphone talking about how they feel fear every single time their kids walk out the door. I know as a privileged white woman that I could never understand what that feels like. But I know how I felt listening to those parents. And when I talk about being a mom in this campaign and the lens through which I'm going to look at the issues, that is the passion, urgency, and commitment that I'm going to bring to this job every single day. We have the worst possible human among us as our president right now. An unprecedented public health emergency, and working families are in crisis. And I know how what we're going through is tough. The anxiety of trying to juggle working remotely, anxiety about when kids will go back to school, and that we are having a long overdue serious conversation about tackling systemic racism in this country that has been real for 400 years. We can't go back to the way that things were when we come out of this pandemic. We've got to elect new and different types of leaders if we are going to make progress on the issues that we care about. I am going to bring that passion, urgency, and commitment that I bring to being a mom to my kids, and that I am going to bring to fight to protect the long-term best interest for the future generations to Congress. I ask for your vote. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be with you tonight.
Next, please.
I don't believe we heard.
Okay, Jake.
Thank you for organizing this. I enjoyed this conversation. One of the themes of our conversation has been Cory Booker. Cory Booker has some really significant legislation that I support. His legislation on police reform, his legislation on baby bonds, which I think are absolutely critical to closing the racial wealth inequality gap and to providing a better opportunity for equal opportunity for all. His legislation on the Minority Business Resiliency Act. So I'm going to be a strong partner to Senator Booker, who has really been an effective legislator and someone who has put forward substantive proposals to help the Black business community. But I'm not just going to be a partner and someone who follows another legislator's lead. I'm also going to be a leader. I've been a leader on housing in Newton as a city councilor for the last 5 years. The single most important policy issue over the last years to advancing racial justice in this city. I'm going to be a leader in Congress on transportation, which, as I have said, to me is a critical part of how we make Massachusetts a more just place. Our transportation system right now locks people out of economic opportunity. It exposes their health to toxins. It drives climate change, which we know disproportionately impacts Black and brown communities. And it sucks up time away from people's families. And again, disproportionately in the Black community. I need and I want us to reinvent transportation in Massachusetts in a way that's far more equitable, that expands access for businesses to customers, and also that promotes Black entrepreneurs and their ability to start businesses in places that are now inaccessible because of our transit system.
Alan? Oops. Alan.
Yes, again, thank you. I want to thank all the organizations that pulled this together, and thank you for your leadership in fighting for a society that is more about racial and economic justice. We are in an unprecedented moment in our history. We have never had a time when we have so many crises converging at once. The coronavirus health crisis, which has led to the economic crisis, and now the racial justice crisis, sparked by the brutal killing of George Floyd and too many others, and now Jacob Blake. But there is, and the Trump administration has been awful on all of these, but the American people are rising up. We've now had more than 30 million people from all different backgrounds peacefully protesting for more than 75 days to say we must deal with our country's history of systemic racism. Many candidates say, well, elect me and I'll get it done. But I've learned in my life that no one alone, not even a congressperson, can do it alone. I'm the only person who's been a movement leader in this race, who's actually built the coalitions and worked with other people to pass 3 major pieces of legislation that built and inspired the AmeriCorps program and saved it, resulting in 1.1 million people dedicating 1.7 billion hours to fundamentally change the lives of millions of people in the 4th District of Massachusetts, in Boston, and Massachusetts across the country, and giving $4 billion in college scholarships. In all my efforts for change, I've learned that the most important thing is when people come together around shared values, in common purpose, fighting for justice. That's the way every movement starts, and it's the way every movement succeeds. That's the mindset that I will bring to this office if I have the privilege of serving and if you'll support me to get elected. I'm also the only candidate who recognizes that we truly are in a New Deal moment, and I've put out a whole set of ideas, unique ideas. We've talked about some of them: a federal jobs guarantee, emergency wage support. I want to not just save the post office, but expand its mission to include banking for low-income people and people who can't access the big banks. So we don't have the paycheck lenders exploiting people of color and low-income people. I also want to have a public option for broadband. 35% of the people in Fall River don't even have access to broadband. 10,000 school children in Boston have had no school since March because their parents can't afford broadband. I think broadband should be free for low-income people, and the federal government should make that happen. So I would love to work with you. I've got more than 30 years of working on these issues, and if I have the privilege of serving, I want to meet with all of you again right after I'm elected to talk about what can I do most to partner with you so we can take this movement energy and break open the doors of Congress and get a country that is more about racial and economic justice. Thank you all.
Thank you. So, Chris?
Thank you. So again, my apologies for my scheduling issue, but I am so happy that I've been able to make it for part of this and that you allowed me to come in the middle. I really want to thank you for running this forum and raising this issue. The issues that surround social injustice and prejudice in our society. It's so important for us, especially in this district, because the reality is our district is one of the least diverse districts in the country, and certainly in the Northeast. And truly, those of us who are white, we can never really understand the experience of our fellow citizens whose skin color is black or brown, but we can listen. And I think that is the most important thing that we have to do. And I hope that enough of our country is listening now for us to actually make progress that has been needed for centuries. It's important, I believe, that we listen and act and bring people together. I've been very happy to see and very pleased to see actions like Mayor O'Connell and Taunton bringing together police and citizens to figure out how to deal with the full issue of public safety, to go beyond just policing, to deal with mental health and housing and transportation and education and opportunity, which leads to lack of safety, right? As well as dealing with the issues of embedded and institutionalized racism in the processes and policies. This is the way forward. You know, I mentioned I bike through every town in our district. Our people are good. They want to work together. I met a policeman in Hopedale who just told me with pride about the Black Lives Matter march that they had in the town. But we can't demonize everyone. We have to bring people together. And that's why I think Mayor O'Connell's example is an important one, as well as what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are doing to try to bring people together to deliver liberty and justice for all. So thank you again for the opportunity and for really raising this issue to a much higher profile in a district where it just doesn't get much daylight, unfortunately.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for participating. Thank you for your answers. It's been very enlightening for us and hopefully for the voters in the 4th District. Now, you can be sure to tune in tomorrow night for the second Black Business Month Forum with U.S. Senate candidates Edward Markey and Representative Joe Kennedy. That will be at 6:00 p.m. For more information, you can visit blackforum.eventbrite.com. I had a great time tonight, and I hope it was enlightening for everyone. Thank you again, candidates, for coming out and sharing your views.
I'd like to say one other thing, and that is to support BECMA. BECMA is a means to an end. They are solution-oriented. They are doing the work that has needed to be done for quite some time. So when you talk about how you support Black businesses, support the organizations that do the work, and BECMA does it. Thank you so much.
Amen to that. Good night.